Merci bien. Last time I gave a keynote in Paris, I did it in French, but it's been 10 years, so the French is gone. I am going to talk today about the subject of open source and the digital recovery. And to talk a little bit about the macro perspective, let's talk about the question of what is it that we are trying to recover. Today, worldwide ICT spending is $3.4 trillion a year, and of that, 18% goes into applications that are abandoned before ever reaching production, and 55% are challenged, meaning that they are late, they're broken, missing key functionality, or some combination of the three. And the result is that globally, we are wasting $1 trillion a year, which in 2006, or even as late as 2007, might have seen a fair cost of doing business. But today, we do not have another $1 trillion to waste. The conclusion of this analysis is that the current way we use information and communication technologies, the way we invest in it, the way we develop and deploy it, is not sustainable. And by the way, I should point out that this the topic of this speech has already been blogged at opensource.org/blog. So if you struggle to take notes, please know that all of these notes are available with detailed links to the evidence and the data. One of the things which can be observed about proprietary software is its high defect density. The software engineering company Coverity in San Francisco has measured an industry average that has not changed in 5 years. Proprietary software defect density is 20 to 30 defects per 1,000 lines of source code. In open source, they have consistently measured a software quality that on average is 20 to 30 times better, and in specific cases such as the Linux kernel, 100 to 150 times lower defect density than the average proprietary software. Now, one thing that we have learned from what Deming taught to the Japanese and the Japanese taught to the world is that if you build on a foundation of quality, there is no limit to the results that can be achieved. And I would argue that the basis of quality of proprietary software is sufficiently low that it helps to explain why the costs are so high and why it is so difficult and so expensive to maintain. A paper published by James Herbsleb, Andreas Makus, and Tom Fielding in 2001 did an analysis comparing actual open source developer behavior with proprietary developer behavior as related to a dozen different projects, 12 in, or actually 24, 12 in open source, 12 in proprietary. And what they found was that open source software consistently delivered delivered the software faster with fewer bugs that were fixed more rapidly. And this also then relates to the question of why open source has become so important as a tool of platform innovation. It is not just the quality of the platform that decreases the costs. It is the ability of developers to advance the implementation of that platform far more rapidly. Now, in the book, The Long Tail by Chris Anderson, there's a wonderful explanation of how dramatically expanding the possibility of a marketplace creates positive economic benefits. And this open participation of open source has also been seen to create lots more innovation. The digital inclusion that open source permits has created more robust and more specifically functional software. And the long tail stops at the question of free because that question is impossible in a 20th century product-oriented mindset. Everything must cost something, or capitalism fails to explain anything. Now, Chris Anderson tried again to get to free with a book he published called Free, The Future of a Radical Price. And others have argued, and I will agree, that Chris Anderson in the book Free fails to understand his own hypothesis. The fundamental fact of the price of free is that the concept of a product disappears, and it is only the service which becomes relevant. So if we think in quantum mechanical terms, in the particle-wave duality, the particle disappears, and all that we have left are the waves. What I have found, and my history goes back to starting the world's first open source company in 1989, and as vice president of Red Hat, seeing results from the cockpit of the world's largest open source company, it is all in the service. It is all in the subscriptions that we enable. And the proof of this can be seen that when other companies attempt to compete with us by copying our bits, whose intrinsic value is zero, they fail to make a successful business. For some reasons I cannot explain, companies insist on trying to compete with Red Hat, product versus product. And as I say, that's a failure. That's a recipe for failure. It must be based on services. Now, one thing that Europe has as a fantastic research is the Open Source Observatory. And they published a draft report last year that explains why exit costs are so important to the software procurement process. And as the previous speakers have indicated, procurement policy is extremely important to consider. The fact of high exit costs becomes even more important when you consider the following. If the cost to acquire software is zero, then the cost of exiting the software becomes the only significant cost. Now, what this report shows is that if you cannot quantify your exit cost, which is a very difficult thing to do when a monopoly prevents you from leaving their platform, when vendor lock-in is powerful. If you cannot quantify those costs, you should limit them. And if you cannot limit the cost, which is one reason why we see $1 trillion a year going down the drain, 30 cents of every dollar being wasted because of bad software. If you cannot limit that loss, then you should choose other software, which we are now seeing in the world of open source, or you should establish better procurement policies. Now, finally, Europe also has a very important role to play in the subject of establishing a role of software sustainability. And one of the greatest threats to the software sustainability is software patents. The function of software patents today is to increase the cost of innovation for companies who do not control the patent. And today, we live in a global marketplace where there are thousands of potential innovators, and the bottleneck of patents increases the cost to all and makes available benefits for very few. So I would recommend that Europe continue its fight against software patents, and finally to consider as a takeaway message, if your procurement policies offer you no exit, then as Jean-Paul Sartre predicts, you will find yourself in hell. But open source is the way out. Thank you.